You know you're having a rough week when a GB News guest describes you with two words that are so savage, so cutting, so absolutely brutal that they become the headline. And for Rachel Reeves, that moment arrived courtesy of broadcaster Mike Parry, who looked into the camera and declared the Chancellor to be economically illiterate. Not struggling with economics, not getting a few things wrong, economically illiterate. That's the kind of insult that leaves a mark. Welcome to UK Political Insight, where we watch politicians get absolutely destroyed in real time. And today we're diving into why GB News just became the scene of one of the most savage takedowns of Labour's Chancellor. What this latest U-turn on pub business rates says about the government's competence, and whether Mike Parry's nuclear assessment of Reeves is actually justified. Spoiler alert, he makes some very good points. Right, let's set the scene because context matters here. We're on GB News. It's Friday, January 9th, and the topic is Labour's latest U-turn on pub business rates. This is the same U-turn we've covered before, but now we're getting the reaction phase, where commentators and politicians are weighing in with their takes. Mike Parry, a broadcaster who clearly has strong feelings about British pubs, is going absolutely volcanic. And sitting across from him is Scarlett Maguire, who's attempting to defend the government while Mike systematically dismantles their credibility. Mike opens with a point that's actually quite important. He says, on this particular issue, it's already too late for a lot of pubs. 2,000 pubs have closed over the last 5 years in this country. It goes back to the Tories, but it's not getting any better. And if they really loved pubs, they should have changed it when they came into power. Now, this is a fair criticism. Labour came in promising change, promising to be different from the Conservatives, promising to support British institutions and working people. And what did they do? They announced policies that would make life harder for pubs. 2,000 pubs closed in 5 years, and Labour's response was to make the situation worse before being forced to U-turn. But then Mike drops the nuclear bomb, the two words that are going to haunt Rachel Reeves like a bad karaoke performance you wish everyone would forget. He says, Rachel Reeves is economically illiterate. Economically illiterate. That's not just saying she made a mistake or got some calculations wrong. That's saying the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the person in charge of the entire British economy, doesn't understand basic economic principles. It's like saying the captain of a ship doesn't know how boats work. It's devastating. And then Mike backs it up with specifics because unlike some political commentary that's all heat and no light, he's actually making a substantive argument. He says, if you put up the cost of a barman and a barmaid, if you put up the cost of rent, if you put up the cost of the beer, pubs are under enormous threat. They're going to close down. This is basic economics. If you increase costs across the board for an industry that's already struggling, that industry is going to contract. Businesses will close. Jobs will be lost. Communities will lose their local pubs. This isn't complicated stuff. This is economics 101. The national insurance increase hits pub employers because they have staff. The business rates increase hits them because they occupy property. The general cost increases in everything from beer to utilities squeeze their margins even further. You don't need a degree in economics to understand that if you make running a pub more expensive, fewer pubs will survive. And yet, according to Mike, this apparently escaped the notice of our economically illiterate Chancellor. Mike continues with another savage observation. She's done nothing to stop that until she's been made to do that by a group of MPs who suddenly found they've got constituents who like pubs. This is a killer point. Reeves didn't wake up one morning and think, you know what, I should support pubs because it's the right thing to do. She was forced into it by political pressure. Backbench MPs started getting earfuls from constituents. Landlords threatened protests. The industry revolted. And only then, only when the political cost became too high, did the government decide to act. That's not leadership. That's damage control. Then Mike makes what might be his most controversial but also most interesting point. He says, I'm devoted to pubs in this country. I've been using them since I was 15, and I would hate to see them gone. And I raised the question with Scarlett this morning. Do Labour hate pubs? I wonder whether it's the association, because in pubs, people get together and they talk about how poor the government is. And I wonder whether Labour are trying to cut down on that. Now, on the surface, this sounds like conspiracy theory territory. The government actively trying to destroy pubs because they're centers of political dissent? Come on. But strip away the conspiratorial framing, and there's actually something interesting here. Pubs are traditionally working-class spaces where people gather, socialize, and yes, talk politics. They're community hubs. And labor, despite claiming to represent working people, has implemented policy after policy that makes life harder for these exact spaces. Is it deliberate? Probably not. But is it revealing about who actually influences labor policy? That's worth thinking about. Scarlett Maguire, attempting to defend the government, responds with, "Mike, we know that is utter rubbish." She then points out that Keir Starmer has a local pub called the Pineapple, as if the Prime Minister occasionally having a pint somehow disproves the argument that government policy is harming pubs. It's the political equivalent of saying, "I can't be bad for the environment, I recycle sometimes." Having a local pub doesn't mean your policies aren't destroying the pub industry. These two things can coexist quite comfortably. But here's where the debate gets really interesting. Stephen Dixon, the presenter, asked Scarlett a crucial question. Is this an example of Rachel Reeves implementing economic policies without thinking through the consequences? This is the question at the heart of everything. Because if Reeves understood the consequences and went ahead anyway, that's one kind of failure. But if she didn't think through the consequences, if she genuinely didn't anticipate that increasing costs for pubs would threaten their survival, then that's the economically illiterate scenario Mike is describing. Scarlett's response is fascinating because it's such a perfect encapsulation of how labor supporters are trying to spin this disaster. She says, "I think it's two things, but I also think it's a you can't win thing. When labor does listen and say that was a mistake, everybody goes, it's another U-turn, whereas actually, thank goodness they're listening." This is the damned if you do, damned if you don't defense. Poor labor, they're just trying to listen to people and everyone's being mean about their constant U-turns. But this completely misses the point. Nobody's criticizing labor for listening. People are criticizing them for announcing policies that they should never have announced in the first place if they'd done proper consultation and impact assessment beforehand. The U-turns aren't evidence of listening. They're evidence of incompetence. It's like saying build a brigand after setting fire to it. The "you can't win" framing is particularly disingenuous because labor absolutely can win. They can win by thinking policies through before announcing them. They can win by consulting with stakeholders properly. They can win by doing impact assessments that actually assess impact. They can win by not implementing policies that everyone with industry knowledge tells them will be disastrous. This isn't an impossible standard. This is basic governmental competence. Pat McFadden, the Work and Pension Secretary, tried to explain the situation on BBC Radio 4, and his explanation is actually quite revealing. He said there are three different things happening. The rates themselves have been reduced, there's been a re-evaluation pushing up bills, and COVID support has been withdrawn. He's essentially admitting that the government knew these three factors would combine to create steep increases for pubs. So which is it? Did they not understand the consequences, or did they understand and don't care until the backlash forced them to act? Either answer is damning. If they didn't understand, they're incompetent. If they understood and don't care, they're callous. And if they understood, didn't care, and are only acting now because of political pressure, they're weak and reactive. Pick your poison, because none of these options make the government look good. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture here. Mike Parry's economically illiterate assessment might sound harsh, but is it actually wrong? Let's look at the evidence. Reeves announced an employer national insurance increase that businesses warned would cost jobs and suppress wages. She's implemented business rates changes that the pub industry said would cause closures. She's overseen an economy that's barely growing despite promises of growth being the government's main mission. At what point do we stop giving her the benefit of the doubt and start questioning whether she actually knows what she's doing? The pub business rates fiasco is particularly egregious because it was so preventable. The pub industry has been struggling for years. Everyone knows this. The data is public. The trends are clear. So why would you implement a policy that makes their situation worse? Either you don't understand that increasing costs for struggling businesses will accelerate their decline, which is economically illiterate, or you understand and don't care, which is economically cruel. Neither is a good look for a chancellor. Mike's point about 2,000 pubs closing in 5 years is crucial because it provides context. This isn't a hypothetical problem. This is an ongoing crisis that predates labor, but that labor has actively made worse. When you inherit a problem and your first instinct is to make it worse before political pressure forces you to partially fix it, you failed. You failed the industry, you failed the workers, and you failed the communities that rely on these institutions. The defensive response from labor supporters like Scarlett is telling because it reveals how they're trying to spin this narrative. They want it to be about labor listening to concerns and making adjustments. They want credit for the U-turn rather than criticism for needing to make it in the first place. They want to be praised for partially fixing a problem they created. It's like setting fire to your neighbor's garden, putting out half the fire, and expecting a medal for your quick response. But the British public isn't stupid. They can see what's happening. They can see a pattern of announcements, backlash, and U-turns that suggest a government without a clear plan or competent execution. They can see that Reeves keeps implementing policies that damage key sectors before being forced to reverse course. And they're drawing conclusions about her competence that are increasingly aligned with Mike Parry's brutal assessment. The "Do labor hate pubs?" question might sound provocative, but it's actually asking something important. Why does a